I'm Kelley Harrell, author, animist, and creator of the Weekly Rune. Soul Intent Arts is my soul tending practice, and you're listening to What in the Weird, my podcast in which I talk about runes, animism, soul tending, and how all of those intersect on my path through nature. Before we start, I give thanks to the runes. They really do keep me focused. Thanks to my allies, the well ancestors, and to everyone who listens to and supports the podcast. I appreciate hearing about your experiences with the runes, and I'm happy to share this space with you. Thank you to my Patreon supporters, the ones with me since the beginning, the ones that just started this week, and everybody in between. They're the folks who make the sharing of my rune work through the podcast and the Runecast possible with their financial support. If you've benefited from the Runecast, the podcast, or the loads of free articles on the runes, animism, energetic hygiene, and soul tending on my website, you can show your support through buying my books at soulintentarts.com or elsewhere online, by making a one-time contribution through PayPal or Square, by contributing regularly through Patreon. Just go to patreon.com and search for Kelley Harrell. You can also subscribe to the paid version of the Weekly Rune there, and thank you. Speaking of, the Weekly Rune has been published, and if you're not sure what it is, it's a runecast with the spirits of place that I've done for years, focused on Nigel Pennick's calculation of a runic calendar and the current half-month rune, all situated into place with the elements, directions, season, and bone allies. If you're not sure what a half-month is or what a runic calendar is, listen to the early episodes of What in the Weird, or just go read the Weekly Rune. It's fully explained at the beginning of every runecast. The full version of the runecast is available only through Patreon, but you can still read the highlights for free on my website, Soul Intent Arts. So what are we doing in this episode? I've gotten notes from new listeners, and I want to take a moment to reintroduce what I'm doing in Season 6 of What in the Weird for those who are just tuning in. I'm an animist, which means I approach life experiencing that I'm in relationship with everything around me, human persons and non-human persons. Nouns, essentially. How I engage those relationships is everything. How we engage nouns is through verbs. Verbs are how we're active with nouns. This season of the podcast explores the runes as verbs, how we can find relationship with the runes to take action with them in our lives. The runes as verbs. Now then, Thurisaz. With the Thurisaz Galder, we have, though are not limited to, Thuri. I talked about this dynamic in the Weekly Rune for this week, though I want to touch on it again here. There are certain runes that when I do readings for folks, if those runes come up, they cringe. And I get it. It's not that I don't. Those runes are usually Tiwaz, Hagalaz, Nautis, Iwaz, and also Thurisaz. It's always the big change runes or the you're stuck runes that freak people out. And from my vantage point as an animist, when we view things through that binary, we're missing the nuance of what they have to bring our lives. Remember, in animism, everything is alive, which means each rune is two. It is life force with agency, which means if we look at certain runes only through a binary, good, bad, it's time to re-explore how we're in relationship with those runes. So let's talk about Thurisaz. This rune has different meanings depending on which rune poems you read. It can be Thor, sort of with the caveat of his hammer, Mjolnir, striking and generating teeth-rattling change as lightning does. It can be Thurs, as in Jotnar, troll, ogre, primal life forces. When I say primal, I don't mean they're old. I mean they're the oldest earthly forces of nature. They are Reimthurser of Niflheimr, and in the Old Norse cosmology, they were pretty intense beings. Because so much of our recording and translation of such beings is through a Christian lens, I hesitate to draw on the more modern, charged understandings of Thurs. What I do want to note is how they were fiercely loyal to their word, their fellow landvatir, their kindred. And I also want to touch on the thorn meaning of Thurisaz, as in something that pierces and irritates you. When we cobble all of that together, we get certain traits. Something within us that generates change, something that is elementally rooted in the oldest energies of all things, something that doesn't stop until it's addressed. All well and good, but what does that mean as animists? What about that conglomeration is livable rune lore? What about it suggests direct personal relationship, right? I mean, those are the questions we're asking as animists living through the runes in season. Let's revisit the Futhark progression up to this point. Fehu is the tradition of interdependence, tending wealth so that we're all supported and all stay alive. And Uruz is where we realize we're soul in form. It is embodiment. Then we arrive at Thurisaz, radical change motivated from within as a first point of self-initiation. We are all born, but we are not born initiated. Specifically, I mean, we're not born understanding what it means to be a soul in form here, or knowing what our duties as custodians of the planet are. And now, literally in this time, we aren't born with elders who teach us any of the aforementioned. Thurisaz, to which I attribute the verb to quicken, which means to bring life into, to return from the dead, to enliven, awaken. Given the internal nature of Thurisaz, it's the point at which we choose life. Again, born, not born initiated. We have to consciously choose to weave our most primal inner Thurs life forces into form and higher consciousness. We understand that we have to tend being here. We understand that to really make use of being here, we have to be embodied. But to do any of that with integrity, we have to allow ourselves to be fully here. The earthly consciousness, the trans consciousness, the primal consciousness, our shadows, our ego, and they all have to function under the singular directive of souling in form well. The catch with all of that is, if we haven't done the work with Uruz to know what embodiment feels like and to understand how to live out of that, even with each of our unique challenges, then our experience of Thurisaz can be really fraught. If we move from Uruz without an awareness of how we're in our body, then we move into the experience of our inner Thurs without the ability to ground it, which is akin to berserker energy without the focused container and outlet that's intended for the release of such energy. In other words, it's dangerous for us and the people around us. And the way we get that focused container is to learn grounding skills. They are not the same as embodiment skills. With Uruz embodiment, we're coming into our body as fully as we can. With Thurisaz, grounding, we're engaging the elements in our spirits of place and within ourselves to root into Earth Parent and Sky Parent to help us hold our wild. Subtle, but big difference. It's also worth mentioning that we're on a broken path. We do not have elders who hold the wisdom of how to embody and ground into our elements and spirits of place, into the wisdom of our well ancestors. So the tension you might feel coming up around finding practices that help you accomplish this self-awareness is real, and it's a grief bigger than just you. It's absolutely cultural, and we live in a culture that actively works against you having that self-awareness. Maybe a more modern way to put that is, When we're not in good relationship with our inner Thurs, that can also look like chasing enlightenment. It's constantly seeking something greater than ourselves without embracing our own sacredness and grounding it into the nature around us to live through it. A poor relationship to Thurisaz is acting on instinct without engaging ego to know if that's a wise choice. Approaching Thurisaz this way, its focus is to be whole self. Move through life fully, soulfully embracing self. This is quickening, and in Old Norse, the word was kvikna, and it meant to give life to, as in return from the dead. Again, born, not born initiated. We're only fully enlivened after we realize we're alive and assume responsibility for what living as aware as we possibly can means. No one is fully actualized. One more time. No human is fully actualized. To set that as a goal is chasing enlightenment. It's to set yourself up to live in a berserker stance. I say it because I've done it. We all have, as is the way of settler culture. I challenge you to take some time to sit with what it means to be fully aware of yourself and what living that awareness in daily life looks like. It isn't about constantly chasing the enlightenment carrot stick. Always feeling like there's a spiritual goal just beyond reach. Rather, quickening is the realization that you are sacred and that you can move through life with that sacredness at the fore to be as present as you can to both of those things. And how present we can be at any given time changes. It has different textures and nuances, is expressed through different senses. The initiation that Thurisaz speaks of isn't drawing something up from within us that wasn't already there. It's cultivating a life that lets us live our primal soul informedness. It's the chosen quickening, making us not just matter walking around, but fully aware of being kin to all things. Thank you for listening. If you have questions or insights about working with the runes as verbs or in season, or however you feel called to work with them, or if you just want to drop me a line, you can do that at Kelley, that's Kelley, at soulintentarts.com. Also check out earlier episodes by downloading them from various podcast platforms. You can learn more about me, Runic Book of Days, and my work by visiting soulintentarts.com or on Instagram at Kelley Soul Arts. You can also find notes on this episode on my website under the menu option Read Livable Rune Lore. I'm Kelley, and this has been What in the Weird. Thank you for all that you do in the world.